Virtual Church. It's really good again to be with you, and really pleased that we can share together in today's session. We're learning again about Paul and his journey to discovering who Jesus really was and how we can live for him. And it's all about what's there. Love. It's all about love. You see, a lot of people think that the story of the Bible is all about rules and things we can't do. But one of the things that Jesus teaches us is that love is the most important thing in the entire universe. Love is just everything. So this morning, I'm not going to talk for much longer than this because it's a brilliant session that we've got lined up for you. So I really hope you have a great morning worshipping God, learning about what happened to Paul and how it changed his life, and how he went on to change the lives of so many others. And if you want to respond to this story, then why don't you go and talk to your mums and dads and those that are with you today, and tell them about this story and say that you want to respond to. And if they're not sure, then I'm sure they can get hold of myself or one of the other team or one of the other ministers. But have a really good morning worshipping, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Bye for now.
1, 2, 3, 4. Jesus is greater than the greatest heroes. Jesus is closer than the closest friends. He came from heaven and he died to save us, to show us love that never ends. Son of God and the Lord of glory, he's the light, following his way. He's the truth that we can believe in. He's the life he's living today. Son of God and the Lord of glory, he's the light, following his way. He's the truth that we can believe in. He's the life he's living today. Jesus is greater than the greatest heroes. Jesus is closer than the closest friends. He came from heaven and he died to save us, to show us love that never ends. Son of God and the Lord of glory, he's the light, following his way. He's the truth that we can't believe in. He's the life he's living today. Son of God and the Lord of glory, he's the light, following his way. He's the truth that we can't believe in. He's the life he's living today. I said that he's the life he's living today. Oh yeah, he's the life he's living today.
Down with Rules, the story of Paul, part 2. Last week, we heard how Paul, who was then called Saul, hated Jesus and anyone who followed him. But then he met Jesus and was blinded, but then could see things differently. Paul got a new job. He called himself a servant and travelled everywhere, telling people about Jesus. It's not about keeping rules, Paul told people. You don't have to be good at being good for God to love you. You just have to believe what Jesus has done and follow him. Because it's not about trying, it's about trusting. It's not about rules, it's about grace, God's free gift that cost him everything. What had happened to Paul? Of course, he had met Jesus. Whilst he was sharing the good news, he even got shipwrecked 3 times. But it didn't stop him. He even ended up in prison. But he still told people about Jesus. He wrote letters. God loves us, he wrote from prison. Nothing can ever, no, not ever, separate us from the never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love of God he showed us in Jesus. And so it was, just as God promised Abraham that dark night all those years before, the family of God's children grew and grew, until one day they will come to number more than even all the stars in the sky.
The greatest day in history. Death is beaten and you have rescued me. Sing it out, Jesus is alive. The empty cross, the empty grave. Life eternal, you have won the day. Shout it out, Jesus is alive. He's alive. And oh, happy day, happy day. You wash my sin away. Oh, happy day, happy day. I'll never be the same. Forever I am changed. When I stand in that place, free at last, meeting face to face. I am yours, Jesus, you are mine. Endless joy, perfect peace. Earthly pain finally will cease. Celebrate, Jesus is alive. He's alive. I know, happy day, happy day. You wash my sin away. Oh, happy day, happy day. I'll never be the same. Forever I am changed. Oh, what a glorious day. What a glorious way. As you have saved me, and oh, what a glorious day, what a glorious day. And oh, happy day, you wash my sin away. Oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Oh, happy day, you wash my sin away. Oh, happy day, I'll never be the same. Forever
The Miracle of Mercy. Paul. This is Saul. Saul was a Pharisee who hated the followers of Jesus so much that he would hunt them down to be brought to trial in Jerusalem. And he would even seek to murder them. Saul was uttering threats with every breath, and he was eager to kill the Lord's followers. So he went to the high priest. He asked him to write a letter to the Jews in Damascus that would allow him to arrest any Christians he found there. He wanted to bring them, both men and women, back to Jerusalem in chains. Now Saul went on his way. And as he came near Damascus, a light from heaven flashed around him, and he heard a voice that said, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Saul cried out, "Who are you, Lord?" And the voice said, "I am Jesus. Rise and go into the city, and you will be told what to do." So Saul got up and he opened his eyes, but he couldn't see anything. So the men who were with Saul led him into the city. After 3 days, a man named Ananias came to Saul. He put his hands on Saul, and immediately Saul could see again. And with that, Saul became a follower of Jesus. He became the very thing he had tried to hunt. And he immediately began telling people that Jesus is the Son of God, and he taught them about the mercy of God that he had received. And all who heard him were amazed. He then went by a new name, Paul, as he began preaching not just to the Jewish people, but to everyone. Despite many difficulties like being imprisoned, shipwrecked, and narrowly escaping death multiple times, Paul continued to preach about Jesus. Paul said that he would do everything he could to save people and help them know God. And that's just what he did in order to reach people who would otherwise be unreached. And many came to know Jesus because of what Paul said. Paul taught many in his day through his letters, but even more have come to learn more about Jesus through the letters of Paul that can be read even to this day.
You are holy, you are awesome in your power. You have risen, you have conquered, you have beaten the power of death. You are holy, you are awesome in your power. You have risen, you have conquered, you have beaten the power of death. Rejoice. awesome in your power. You have risen, you have conquered, you have beaten the power of death. You are holy, you are awesome in your power. You have risen, you have conquered, you have beaten the power of death. You are mighty, you are holy, you are awesome in your power. You have risen, you have conquered, you have beaten the power of death. You have beaten the power of death. You have beaten the power of death.
Hello, John here. I'm fascinated by Paul's explanation of Jesus' teaching that rules don't really matter as much as love. And I've been wondering how we can show that. You see, if our heart is tuned into God's love, then we don't need rules, do we? We'll naturally do the right thing. And I would like to find a way of illustrating this teaching. So I looked up rules and came up with a page of rules from the Football Association rulebook. Let me show you. I've made this sheet of paper, sheet of rules, into a rule book. That's going to be my rule book. Now, how to represent love? Well, what about a heart? I took a piece of origami paper, folded it in half, and cut a heart out of it. So I've got a heart now. My heart would stick, I can stick my heart on my rule book. Before we do that, let's label it up, shall we? We're going to have the heart. It's going to be God's love. So I'm going to write on here God's love. And the message of today is not rules, but love. So let's write rules and cross it out, and love with a great big tick beside it. Let's see how that looks. Can you see that? Not very clear, is it? There we are. God's love, rules no, love yes. And let's stick that onto there. A little bit of glue. Small piece of glue. Da, 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 da. There we go. Stick that on my rule book. Now what I've got now is a reminder. Not rules, but love. Okay? I think that's a way that'll help me to remember. See you next week. Bye.